We thought we were in a good position as a studio to make a reasonable effort on FZero because it hadn't been done for a while. You know, the last FZero was probably GX. 16 players, 16 AI, a course editor, map editor that you could share with your friends, 60 frames a second on the Switch. Would have been awesome. Still could have been awesome. I wish we could have finished that.
With all these rumors about a new FZero floating around, we decided to take a dive into the unexplored depths of the series. Some prominent players in the world of FZero have been trying to bring back the series for quite some time. Toshihiro Nagashi, the producer of FZero GX, that's my favorite one, had some evolutionary ideas as soon as GX was finished. And Nintendo of Europe tried to jumpstart a revival. Twice. Kinda. And then there's former Nintendo programmer Giles Goddard, and the revolutionary prototype his team built for the Switch. What would those F-Zero sequels have been like if they'd crossed the finish line? And why didn't they ever take off from the starting line? Before we get into all that, let's cover a bit of the background info so that we're all on the same track. Nintendo made the original F-Zero on SNES and F-Zero X on Nintendo 64 themselves, along with BS F-Zero Grand Prix 1 and 2 on the 64DD expansion, which were only released in Japan, and also a Virtual Boy spin-off that was completed but locked into a vault, never to be seen by the public. But around the dawn of the GameCube era, Nintendo started making fewer games themselves and relied more on outside studios. Metroid Prime was outsourced to Retro, Star Fox was with Rare and Namco, and even Zelda got lent out to Capcom. We call them collaborations, Miyamoto told NGC magazine. What Nintendo was doing differently these days is trying to build strong relationships between the game creators at Nintendo and those at other companies. It's not company versus company anymore. Something most of these series had in common was a decline in sales, and F-Zero was sadly no exception. Every new game sold less than the one that came before it, so Nintendo contracted their old rival Sega to take the reins and make a new F-Zero for the GameCube. Toshihiro Nagashi, the creator of the incredibly popular Daytona USA arcade series, was put in charge of development. Even though we'd lost the hardware market, I wanted Nintendo to see how great Sega was as a company, Nagashi recounted years later. The only thing we needed to admit was that Sega did not have the ability to sell hardware. Miyamoto was involved. He was like a god to me then. Miyamoto was the F-Zero series producer from the very beginning, and he told Nagashi, "You know how to do this. All you need to do is be confident and just do it, without hesitation." And the results speak for themselves. When it finally hit store shelves, GX was lauded by critics and fans alike, gathering review scores around 90%. Even Nintendo was impressed at what Nagashi accomplished. After release, they called him up and asked to see the source code because they couldn't figure out how he'd made such an amazing game with the time and budget that they'd given him. Takaya Imamura, longtime series supervisor at Nintendo and creator of Captain Falcon, said, "I'm at a loss as to how we can take the franchise further past F-Zero GX." But Nagashi knew he could push the series even farther and wanted to make a sequel. Talking to UK magazine Cube, he said, "To tell you the truth, during the programming processes, we did not have time to develop some of the courses I really wanted to implement in the game. Courses I wanted, but could not incorporate into the existing F-Zero game. So yes, there will be further advancements when it comes to the course designing." He went on to say that online play would be really interesting with a randomly generated course system. Some fans complained that GX was too hard, and to them Nagashi said, and quote, "If you feel that you've been tortured, I'm really sorry, but that the punishing difficulty was absolutely on purpose. So we could probably expect the same Tough as Nails gameplay in a Nagashi-led sequel." He also said that they pushed the Cube to its graphical limits, and since F-Zero's never been a yearly franchise, presumably the next one would have had to be for Wii. But despite its critical acclaim, GX barely managed to sell half as many copies as the previous entry, and Nagashi's ideas for a sequel never became a reality. Later that same year, a 51-episode anime was produced, and Nintendo partnered with Japanese studio Suzak to produce the anime-inspired game GP Legend for the Game Boy Advance. Nintendo was throwing the kitchen sink at F-Zero. You can't say they didn't try at the time, but sales fell even further. The entire series was dubbed into English, but ended up getting cancelled after the 15th episode aired on Fox. Suzak made one more Game Boy Advance game a year later, F-Zero Climax, but sales were so abysmal that Nintendo didn't bother releasing it outside of Japan. That was the death knell for the franchise. It was over. Nagashi left Sega in 2019 to form his own studio, and to this day he still wants to make a sequel to GX, but it seems Nintendo just isn't interested. Nagashi wasn't the series' only suitor though. Someone else who wanted to see the world's fastest racer return, and they're gonna come up a couple of times in this video, was Nintendo of Europe. In early 2011, they picked up the phone and called TheCartoonGamer, the guys who spent the last decade cutting their teeth on the Need for Speed and Burnout series. According to Criterion's creative director, Alex Ward, Nintendo of Europe asked me if there was any chance we could do a new F-Zero for them, and if so, could you be ready to show it at E3 in June? Because they were short of games coming to their Wii U hardware. The UK guys were trying to match Western developers with Nintendo-owned intellectual property. When word got out, some news outlets may have oversold the story a little, saying the game almost got made and would have been a Wii U launch title. It wasn't until a few years later that Ward clarified the situation. He said the guy at Nintendo Europe wasn't very high up. Maybe if it was Miyamoto himself, a deal could have been struck, but even if it was Miyamoto, Criterion was 100% owned by EA, so the decision would have been up to the corporate types. And besides, Ward's team was already up to their necks making a new Need for Speed, so it was a bit of an exaggeration to say the Wii U almost launched with the Criterion-made F-Zero. After 9 years without a new entry, Captain Falcon was becoming better known as that guy who punches in Super Smash Bros., and people started asking Miyamoto why. In 2012, French site Game Cult polled their readers asking what series they missed the most. One of the top results was F-Zero, so they showed Miyamoto and said, "Nobody really understands why Nintendo hasn't made a new one since 2004. Is there a chance we can see it come back on Wii U?" Miyamoto's eyes opened wide and he said, "I'm really pleased to hear their opinion, because since the first episode on SNES, many games have been made but the series has evolved very little. I thought people had grown weary of it. I'd like to say, thank you very much, and try to wait by playing Nintendo Land's F-Zero minigame. I'm also very curious and I'd like to ask those people, why F-Zero? What do you want that we haven't done before?" A few months later at E3, GameSpeed asked a similar question. Mario Kart 8 made a showing, but where was F-Zero? "I certainly understand that people want a new F-Zero game," Miyamoto told them. "I think where I struggle is that I don't really have a good idea for what's new that we could bring to F-Zero that would really turn it into a great game again. Certainly, I can see how people looking at Mario Kart 8 could see, through the anti-gravity, a connection to F-Zero, but I don't know, at this point, what direction we could go in with a new F-Zero." Captain Falcon's creator Imamura said something similar, that F-Zero needed a grand new idea if it was going to make a comeback. Some fans bristled at their comments. New tracks, HD graphics, online play. Wasn't that enough? To be fair to Nintendo though, the series had been evolving. Better graphics, faster speeds, more cars, but it wasn't enough to keep sales from driving off a cliff. People just weren't buying them. So from that perspective, maybe it was gamers who weren't satisfied with mere evolution. Maybe it really was gonna take a revolution. More on that later. But to better understand F-Zero's past, as well as its future, we need to veer off track real quick and look at how the genre's puttered along in its absence. During the 20-year drought, several studios pulled for position to become F-Zero's spiritual successor, with games like Redout and Formula Fusion. If you're an F-Zero fan, at some point you might have googled something along the lines of, "What games can I play like F-Zero?" If you did, the top result was probably Fast RMX. Not only was it a Switch exclusive, it was a Switch launch title and was apparently received quite favorably as the next best thing to an actual F-Zero. We asked Fast RMX's designer and programmer Manfred Linzner, "Was that your intention? If Nintendo won't make it, we will?" Not exactly. He said the first game on WiiWare started as a prototype of fish swimming around a Kirby stream. He made a joke to his team that, and I quote, "We could make a game out of it and call it FZero." The joke quickly got serious though, and over the next few minutes, they decided to abandon the fish altogether and make a futuristic racer instead. They eventually made more ambitious sequels for Wii U and Switch, with some help from our old friends at Nintendo of Europe. Linzner said, yeah, he'd heard the Criterion story. "It seems some Nintendo of Europe employees are fans of F-Zero, he told us, adding a little smiley face. After we shared some not too exciting prototypes with Nintendo of Europe, they gave us very honest feedback. That was super valuable because we were a bit lost in technical details and they saw better than us the full potential we could reach. They helped us understand how to design tracks and environments that played and felt like we envisioned. We were very happy how the sequels turned out. And of course, we're also very grateful that Nintendo published the Wii U physical edition, then allowed and encouraged us to make a launch game for the Nintendo Switch." Linzner made Fast RMX with a team of just 4 guys. It's got 30 tracks, 15 cars, up to 8 players online, and it runs at 60 frames a second in 1080p. Keep those numbers in mind for later. Linzner said he couldn't share exact sales figures with us, but it was the best-selling game they ever made, and now 5 years later, it's still selling well each and every week. Another sequel, he told us, is definitely on the cards. Right around the time Fast RMX was racking up high scores, another studio entered the race, but they were determined to make a real F-Zero sequel, Falcon and all. That studio was Chuhai Labs, who needs a little bit of an introduction. Located just down the road from Nintendo HQ in Kyoto, Japan, Chuhai was founded by Giles Goddard, a programmer with a long history at the big end. Back around 1990, he was the first non-Japanese programmer to ever work at Nintendo, simply put because they couldn't find any Japanese programmers as talented as Giles. He worked on the original Star Fox, Mario 64, Goshin the Giant, and many others, including a 3D Game Boy game called X that only released in Japan. Giles and another British programmer, Dylan Cuthbert, worked in an office separate from the Japanese staff, and Miyamoto used it as a smoking room to brainstorm in. In 2002, Giles left Nintendo to start his own studio, Chuhai Labs, where they continued to collaborate with Nintendo, like Steel Diver 1 and 2, where Giles was programming director, Miyamoto was producer, and the director was Imamura, who said he made Sub Wars' mission mode to be like F-Zero in slow motion. More recently, Chuhai released the VR spiritual successor to 1080 called Carve Snowboarding, and their newest game was Curse to Golf, which has seen its share of praise. That's a pretty long introduction, but you get the point. Giles is extremely talented, has a long history with Nintendo, and runs his own studio. In 2021, Giles did a Reddit AMA that had 1,300 comments, but we just want to highlight 2 of them. He said F-Zero was his favorite game on Super Nintendo, but more importantly, revealed that his studio made an F-Zero prototype with ultra-realistic physics. A month later, he sat down for an hour-long interview with GameXplain, during which he spent about 1 minute talking about that F-Zero prototype. Giles said he'd pitch it to Nintendo, but, and we're quoting here, Nintendo are very wary about using old IP, because it's such a huge thing for them to do. It's much easier to go with a new IP than to reuse an old one. We were kind of stuck in a catch-22 working with Nintendo, because we'd say to them, we want to do this F-Zero game, can you give us all this money? And they say, but you don't have enough people. And I'd say, well, if we had the money, we could get the people. So it was forever this kind of ridiculous catch-22 of them wanting us to make a game, us pitching a game, and then them saying, you don't have enough people. We were dying to hear more about it, so we got in touch with them, and it turns out Giles' F-Zero really was revolutionary. Before we get into what Giles told us, we want to let you know that you can now support DidYouKnowGaming by buying eShop codes, Game Pass codes, and even full games on our own store. Instead of giving your money to a giant faceless corporation like Walmart or Target, you can buy the goods on screen through us and help support these videos in the process. This isn't a sponsorship, it's our own store with everything on it curated by us and our partners, FameHype, who are fully certified to sell Nintendo products and more, so you know you won't be getting any dodgy codes from us. If you want a convenient way to buy store codes and games and help support the show, go to store.DidYouKnowGaming.com. Now back to Giles. He told us it was super fast, super chaotic, super realistic physics, so it feels like F-Zero, but there's a lot more depth there. It was quite interesting to see what situations you could get the entire race into. You could bump into one car, it would bump into 2 other cars, and they would bump into the rest of the pack, and it would cause an entire pileup. So it was just fun playing around and seeing how badly you could screw up the race. A fresh take on F-Zero would have been really cool. Each car had 4 jets, and if a car took damage, 1 jet might fail and the car start leaning in that direction. If 2 jets failed, the car would flip over. The demo was made with a team of 3. Giles did the programming, another guy did art, and another made some tweaks to Chuhai's custom engine, although they'd obviously need a bigger team to make a full game. Giles went on to explain the more evolutionary aspects. He said, the idea was massive multiplayer. Massive as in 16 human players, 16 AI, so 32 in total. A course editor, map editor you could share with your friends online, and yeah, 60 frames a second on the Switch. So of course we had to ask, can we get some footage of that demo?
I'm consulting my legal experts in my head. I think I can, because Nintendo didn't pay for the demo. We made it on our own. It was our own code, our assets, and I have it upstairs. It's on my PC. It's just not running on the latest, GFX chips, whatever. So yeah, we could do that. I could do that.
Holy shit! Needless to say, we were pretty stoked. He also said he'd upload it to the internet so fans could download it and play it for free. Although he wanted a little something for his trouble.
No, you don't have to pay for it. I'll do it for free.
Oh shit!
I don't know, if I get 5,000 more Twitter followers, I'll make it.
Now we were double stoked, and over the next couple of months, we bounced emails back and forth with Chuhai talking details. Tragically though, the whole thing ended up falling apart over legal concerns. We'll spare you the details, but basically, we all agreed the future of Giles' studio and the games they'll make are far more important and not worth risking just for this YouTube video. But at least we got to hear the story. Most developers keep these kind of things a secret, so no hard feelings. We love you, Giles, and everyone should go follow him on Twitter anyway. The dude's a legend. Giles had said the game never got made because of money, so how much is it gonna cost? He said, nowadays, less than $1 million, because it doesn't have to be very big, it just has to play really well. You don't need that many programmers. You could probably do it with 5 people, less than $1 million for sure. We got the feeling Giles asked Nintendo for more than $1 million back in those negotiations. To us, $1 million sounds like a pretty small budget, but Fast RMX was made cheaper than that and with a smaller team. A few tasks would inevitably have to be outsourced, like how Fast RMX contracted an outside composer and voice actor. But Giles has been in the biz since the 80s and has plenty of experience budgeting games that too high. The guy knows what he's talking about. That's a lot of potential financial upside with minimal investment. Giles still has a lot of enthusiasm for the project, but even if it wasn't an official FZero title, a lot of fans would still love to see that prototype developed into a full Switch game. We know you're gonna watch this, Giles, so, respectfully, please get back to the negotiating table with Nintendo, or just make a spiritual successor on your own terms. Show us your moves!
Show me your moves!
Also, follow him here on Twitter, folks. Did you also know that the F-Zero spin-off Zero Racers was 100% finished and was gonna be Jody Summer's first game, but Nintendo locked it in a vault because the Virtual Boy sucks? To hear the full story, click the video on screen. My name's TheCartoonGamer, and I would tell you about my channel, but it's more important that I tell you about Aero GPX. It's a GX-inspired indie game that's already fully funded, and I played the demo. You guys, this game is amazing. It's gonna rock your socks off. Please watch out for it. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one. Catch you later.